A teacher with power in her hands, a small student fighting for recognition. But today, that power is being challenged. When silence is no longer an option, Maya, a student once belittled and discriminated against, decides to stand up, not just to defend herself, but to create a lasting change in her school. What happens when injustice is exposed right in the middle of the classroom? Can Maya change a system full of prejudice? Join us in this gripping, powerful, and inspiring story where a small voice can shake the world. Thank you for supporting the channel, and there will be more exciting stories here at Mr. Wisdom Story. Be sure to subscribe for the latest videos. Wishing you joy and peace. The story begins like any normal classroom, but everything is about to face an unexpected truth that will change everything. The bell rings, signaling the start of a new school day at Evergreen High School. Ms. Lambert, an experienced teacher with a stern demeanor, stands waiting in front of her English class. Her eyes sweep over the students as they settle into their seats. The air is thick with tension, as if this heavy atmosphere has become an unspoken part of every lesson. Everything seems ordinary until a new figure steps into the room. The door swings open, and a girl walks in with a backpack slung over her shoulder. It's Maya Johnson, a new student, and she immediately captures the attention of the class. Some students are curious, while others are more guarded, their eyes sharp with skepticism. Ms. Lambert, still holding her serious expression, can't hide the subtle shift in her gaze. Her lips tighten as she watches Maya enter and choose a seat. With a sweet, yet slightly mocking tone, Ms. Lambert speaks up. "It seems we have a new student. I hope you'll be able to keep up with our strict curriculum," she says, emphasizing strict as a warning to Maya. Maya remains silent, simply looking at her, not responding. The class falls into a hush, but there's a subtle change in the air, as though a storm is quietly brewing beneath the surface. The tension between the teacher and this new student is palpable, but no one knows what will happen next. Maya, though new, seems to carry an inner strength that no one understands. The biases and discrimination of Ms. Lambert begin to collide with something Maya has inside her, a force that no one could have predicted. Ms. Lambert, trying to regain control, clears her throat and continues with the lesson. Today, we'll be discussing power and oppression in To Kill a Mockingbird. But as she calls on other students to participate in the discussion, Maya's eyes, filled with determination, begin to reveal a challenge no one saw coming. Ms. Lambert looks at Maya and notices the hand of her new student beginning to rise, not to ask permission, but like a declaration. There's something in Maya's gaze, something different, that makes the atmosphere in the room freeze. The whole class is watching, and everyone can feel that things are about to change. But will they understand what's truly happening? TIPON2 checked the tension had reached its peak, but it was in this very moment that Maya, with all the confidence she could muster, stood up and began to speak. This story was no longer about Ms. Lambert's lecture, but about breaking down prejudices, about the inevitable clash between what had been ingrained in society and a quiet, yet unwavering strength. And would Ms. Lambert be able to recognize the hidden truth as her classroom became a place where people no longer viewed each other through the glass of prejudice? Ms. Lambert, with a mocking smile on her lips, looked at Maya and sighed, as if finally having to acknowledge the presence of this new student. "So, Ms. Johnson, do you have any thoughts to share?" Her voice rang out, condescendingly polite, yet filled with disdain. Maya sat up straight, hands resting on the desk, her gaze calm but resolute. Her voice was steady, yet each word carried an underlying strength. "I believe this novel clearly demonstrates how racism is institutionalized in society." Immediately, Ms. Lambert interrupted, her tone cold and dripping with arrogance. "Well, I think you're confusing a classic American novel with some kind of modern political agenda," she snapped. Her words were not only a denial, but also a thinly veiled warning. The class suddenly became oddly still, as if everyone was holding their breath. An unsettling wave of discomfort spread across the room. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others looked eager, as if they were witnessing an intense drama unfolding before their eyes. Maya, with incredible patience, took a deep breath. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her desk, her eyes never leaving Ms. Lambert, but she did not show an ounce of fear. The racism in this book is undeniable, Maya continued, her voice firm. Ms. Lambert, that's the truth. Ms. Lambert, waving her hand dismissively as if to brush Maya aside, barely paid attention to what she had just said. Maybe you should focus on understanding the text as it was written, rather than trying to impose your own interpretations, she said, each word cutting through what little respect remained for her student. The atmosphere in the classroom grew even more charged, thick as if it could be sliced with a knife. Maya's hair cascaded over her shoulder, but her eyes, sharp with determination, remained calm. Her shoulders did not tremble, but the tension in her gaze and her silence seemed to unsettle Ms. Lambert. Maya remained quiet, but every movement, every look, seemed like a direct challenge to the teacher. Ms. Lambert turned to the whiteboard, grasping a marker and writing something impassive on it. The marker squeaked against the board, as if it was trying to dull the suppressed sighs in the room. Now, let's move on to discussing a real-world issue. Can anyone tell me the symbolism of the mockingbird in this story? She deliberately ignored Maya's gestures. Every time the new student's hand went up, brimming with a desire to speak. Every time Maya raised her hand, Ms. Lambert's gaze was like a cold wave, passing over her, dismissing her as if she didn't exist. A clear message was being sent. Maya's voice was not welcome in this classroom. But that rejection didn't stop at Ms. Lambert. The looks around the room began to shift. Some were anxious, others seemed amused, as if they were waiting for a storm to break. Maya's classmates exchanged glances of worry, while some others smirked, feeding off the teacher's behavior. Despite the clear disappointment on her face, Maya stayed silent. She took notes carefully, the pen gliding smoothly across the page, as if she already knew exactly what would happen next. What was happening in this classroom was no longer just a discussion of a text. It was a silent battle between Maya's quiet defiance and the openly displayed prejudices. Would Ms. Lambert continue to hold on to her self-satisfaction, or would there come a moment when everything exploded and the truth behind all those denials was finally revealed? As the class neared its end, Ms. Lambert stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. Next week, we'll be doing a group project. I'll assign the groups, because I don't want anyone to feel left out. Her words, at first sounding like good intentions, carried a hidden mockery that everyone in the room could sense. Maya narrowed her eyes slightly, her shoulders squared. She understood exactly what Ms. Lambert was implying, but her gaze remained unwavering. She met the teacher's stare directly, silent but full of resolve. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. The students began to file out of the room, each step hurried, eager to escape the stifling atmosphere. Maya wasn't in a rush. She carefully gathered her belongings, each movement deliberate and purposeful. As she neared the door, Ms. Lambert's sharp voice called out, "Maya, a moment." Maya looked up, her expression neutral, revealing no emotion. "Yes, Ms. Lambert?" The teacher's gaze was cold, her smile thin and sharp like a knife. "I hope you understand that in this classroom, we focus on facts and analysis, not personal opinions or any political agenda. I'd hate to see you struggle just because you can't separate your emotions from the lesson." Maya took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady and calm. "I completely understand, Ms. Lambert. I look forward to demonstrating my analytical skills in future discussions." With that, Maya turned and walked out of the room, her pace composed, though her eyes burned with determination. Ms. Lambert stood there, watching the figure of her student retreat, a brief flicker of uncertainty passing across her face. But that moment of hesitation quickly turned into a cold, hard resolve. "I'll show that girl who's really in charge here," she thought to herself. The next week, Maya entered the class with her usual strength and confidence, her head held high. She was ready for whatever was coming. But Ms. Lambert's gaze was already waiting, like a hawk eyeing its prey. The air in the classroom grew thick, signaling that a storm was on the verge of breaking. As the lesson began, Ms. Lambert's focus on Maya became unmistakable. Every gesture, every word Maya spoke, was scrutinized by the teacher. "Ms. Johnson, I see you're chewing gum." Ms. Lambert's voice was icy, like an arrow aimed straight at Maya. Maya paused, her hand still near her mouth. But she wasn't chewing gum, and the entire class saw it. "I'm not chewing gum, Ms. Lambert," Maya replied, her tone calm but firm. "Don't lie to me, young lady," Ms. Lambert nearly shouted, her eyes filled with suspicion and anger. The atmosphere in the classroom froze, all the students holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. But Maya, still maintaining her calm composure, looked directly into Ms. Lambert's eyes, her gaze holding both defiance and patience. The confrontation between Maya and Ms. Lambert grew more intense, like a simmering fire waiting to ignite. But who truly held the power in this classroom? And what would happen when the storm of prejudice finally erupted in full force? Ms. Lambert's voice rang out with mockery, thickening the atmosphere in the room. "Maya, I believe you're chewing gum? That's really disrespectful." The other students looked at Maya with various expressions. Some turned away, unwilling to get involved, while others watched with amusement, as if observing a performance. Maya stood up slowly, every movement deliberate as if each step was carefully considered. She walked to the trash can, mimed spitting out the non-existent gum, then returned to her seat, her demeanor calm but resolute. The silence in the room became deafening. The students exchanged glances, many now looking at Maya with sympathy. But Ms. Lambert didn't stop. Instead, her behavior grew more spiteful. "Maya, your posture is completely inappropriate. This isn't an amusement park," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, though Maya's posture was no different from any of her classmates. Maya clenched her jaw, her hands gripping her pen, trying to stay calm, but her patience was clearly being tested. Meanwhile, the students began to split into two factions. Some, like Sarah, the girl in the front row, looked at Maya with sympathetic eyes. Others, encouraged by Ms. Lambert's attitude, began to smirk and whisper mocking comments. When the group discussion began, Maya tried to participate confidently. She raised her hand, but Ms. Lambert's voice cut through like a knife. "Maya, share your unique perspective, please." Maya began to speak, her voice calm but clear. However, Ms. Lambert immediately interrupted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sorry, but could you pronounce that more clearly? Some of your accents are quite difficult to understand." The class was stunned. A collective gasp echoed, breaking the silence. Maya froze, her eyes wide, her hands clenched tightly under the desk. Ms. Lambert's words weren't just an insult, they were a stark display of prejudice in front of the entire class. When the bell rang to signal the end of class, Ms. Lambert didn't stop. "Maya, meet me after class. We need to discuss your academic progress." Maya walked slowly toward the teacher's desk, her legs feeling heavy, but her expression remained neutral, showing no emotion. Ms. Lambert looked at her coldly, her voice low but sharp. "I hope you understand that your attitude will become an issue if you can't adapt to the standards of this classroom. Maybe you should consider finding a more suitable environment." The implication hung in the air, like a threat. Maya took a deep breath, her eyes flashing with determination. "I understand perfectly, Ms. Lambert. I will continue to give my best, as I always have." She turned to leave, but Ms. Lambert called out from behind. "And don't forget, Maya, you'll be presenting your group project next week. I truly hope you're prepared." Maya paused for a moment, her shoulders squared, then continued walking, her eyes filled with resolve. She knew the battle wasn't over, and she was ready for whatever came next. Maya nodded, her gaze sharp, but her mind raced. She knew that the upcoming presentation wouldn't just be an academic challenge. For Maya, it was an opportunity to break through Ms. Lambert's prejudices and prove that her voice deserved to be heard. But Maya also knew that Ms. Lambert wouldn't let her do that easily. The classroom was filled with anticipation as Maya stepped up to the podium to present her project. The light from the windows illuminated her determined face. Meanwhile, at the teacher's desk, Ms. Lambert sat like a predator, watching Maya's every move, ready to catch any mistake she could use against her. Her hand continuously tapped her pen on the grating sheet, each tap breaking the stillness in the room. Maya began her presentation with a confident and clear voice. She had spent hours researching, carefully analyzing each line of To Kill a Mockingbird, and decided to focus on two main themes: racial injustice and moral courage. In Maya's words, There was a blend of intellect and emotion, drawing the entire class's attention. Some of her classmates, like Sarah, looked at Maya with admiration, while others fidgeted in their seats, sensing the tension building in the room. Ms. Lambert, with a calculating half-smile, seemed to be waiting for the perfect moment. In the middle of the presentation, when Maya paused to answer a question from a classmate, Ms. Lambert slowly raised her hand, her sharp gaze cutting through the room like a knife. Maya, she stretched her tone, feigning sweetness. I'm curious about your focus. Don't you think you might be overemphasizing certain aspects of the novel? Maya furrowed her brow slightly but quickly regained her composure. Her voice remained steady. No, Ms. Lambert. I believe the theme of race is central to understanding the message of the book. In fact, Harper Lee herself— Enough, Ms. Lambert interrupted, her tone cold and sharp. I know exactly what the author said, but what concerns me more is why you, it seems, are unable to appreciate the broader literary values, instead of clinging to your personal viewpoints. The class held its breath. Some students looked down at their desks, unwilling to meet Maya's gaze. But Maya stood tall, her hands clenched at her sides. Her voice was low but firm. Ms. Lambert, I don't believe my analysis is biased. All of my arguments are supported by evidence from the text and scholarly sources. Ms. Lambert stood up, dragging her chair back sharply, the sound echoing in the silent room. She stepped forward, positioning herself between Maya and the rest of the class, like a proud, towering wall of authority. Let me make this clear, Maya, she said, her tone dripping with authority. Focusing on race is not only a misunderstanding, but it also disrupts the learning environment. Perhaps at your old school, such narrow approaches might have been acceptable. But here, we expect more seriousness and objectivity. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out. Some students sat frozen, trying to avoid Maya's eyes, while others stared with a mix of shock and fear. Maya, though pushed to the limit, remained calm. She took a deep breath, her eyes now glowing with the fire of determination. Ms. Lambert, Maya said, her voice ringing strong. I understand that you have your own perspective, but I will continue to present the truth and my analysis honestly and based on evidence. Ms. Lambert smirked, her smile cold and contemptuous. Then I hope you're ready for next week, Maya. Your project presentation will be your chance to truly prove yourself. Maya nodded, her gaze unwavering. I'm always ready. I'm starting to wonder whether you're really capable of handling a curriculum at this level, Ms. Lambert said, her voice both cold and sweet to the point of being unsettling. Maya's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was determined not to let them fall. Her voice, though slightly trembling, remained strong. Ms. Lambert, I disagree. The themes of racial injustice in To Kill a Mockingbird are still highly relevant in today's society. Ignoring them would not only harm the author's message, but also go against the educational goals we're pursuing. Maya's resolve only seemed to intensify Ms. Lambert's disdain. And I believe, Maya, that your almost defiant resistance just shows that you haven't truly grasped the academic expectations of this class. I suggest you sit down and seriously consider whether you're capable of continuing. Maya slowly gathered her materials, the weight of shame heavy on her shoulders. But just as she was about to sit down, a small voice rang out from the back of the room. But I think Maya's presentation was really good, Ms. Lambert. The entire class fell silent. All eyes turned to the student who had dared to speak up, Peter. But Ms. Lambert's cold gaze immediately shifted to him. And I wonder, Peter, what do you know about literary analysis? Perhaps you'd like to join Maya for a private discussion about the flaws in her academic approach. Peter, his face flushed red, lowered his head and shrank back in his seat, not daring to say another word. Ms. Lambert turned back to Maya, her stare freezing the air around them. What are you still standing there for? Sit down, so we can continue with presentations that are actually worth our time. Maya dropped into her seat with a thud. Her face burned, a mix of anger and embarrassment swelling inside her. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some sympathetic, others simply enjoying the spectacle. The injustice weighed heavily on Maya, threatening to overwhelm her. But she took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm, as Ms. Lambert called up the next student. A whirlwind of thoughts spun in Maya's mind. She knew this couldn't continue. But what could she do? The teacher held all the power, and speaking out might only lead to greater humiliation. Still, a quiet resolve began to form within her. This wasn't over. Ms. Lambert stood at the front of the class, a smug smile spreading across her face as she announced, "I've scheduled a meeting with Maya King's parents after school today. I'm sure they'll be very interested in her disruptive behavior and below-average academic performance." The moment her words ended, the atmosphere in the room grew heavy. But then, another sound shattered the silence, the steady, forceful footsteps echoing in the hallway. They grew louder, like a storm approaching. The entire class seemed to hold its breath, sensing something significant was about to happen. The footsteps stopped just outside the classroom door. A brief silence filled the room with possibilities. Then, a sharp, clear knock on the door broke the stillness like a sharp blade. Ms. Lambert frowned slightly, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Come in," she said, her voice cold, tinged with impatience. The door slowly opened, and a tall man in a sharp suit stepped into the room. His presence immediately drew every eye. He radiated authority, and every movement exuded a confidence that instantly changed the atmosphere of the classroom. A wave of recognition swept through the students. It was Mr. King, the principal of the school. Maya's eyes widened, her face showing a mix of surprise and relief. She quickly glanced at Ms. Lambert, who still wore a forced smile, but her eyes betrayed her unease as she realized the connection between the man who had just entered and the student she was trying to undermine. Mr. King entered, his eyes scanning the faces in the room. When his gaze landed on Maya, a brief flash of concern passed between them, but it quickly vanished as he turned to Ms. Lambert. His posture was regal, and his voice, though calm, carried an underlying strength. "Ms. Lambert," he spoke, his tone steady but with an unspoken steel, "I hope I'm not interrupting something too important." Ms. Lambert forced a professional smile, trying to conceal her discomfort. "No, Mr. King," she replied smoothly but with a touch of awkwardness. "We're just finishing our lesson on To Kill a Mockingbird. Is there something I can help you with?" Mr. King nodded, his gaze never leaving Ms. Lambert. "Actually, I heard you requested a parent-teacher meeting with me regarding one of your students." Ms. Lambert's smile widened, clearly pleased that her authority was being acknowledged. "Yes, that's right," she said with a smug tone. "I believe it's important to address a few issues before they become more serious." But as soon as she finished speaking, Mr. King's sharp gaze froze her in place. The air in the classroom thickened, and everyone felt that the real battle was just beginning. Ms. Lambert stood confidently in the meeting room, her eyes gleaming with a sense of victory as she began to outline her concerns. "I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss this issue, Mr. King," she said, her voice sweet but sharp as a knife. "I'm quite worried about Maya's attitude and performance in class. She constantly challenges the curriculum, insisting on imposing her personal views into every discussion. It's making it very difficult for me to complete the lessons I've carefully prepared." Mr. King nodded, his eyes still fixed on Ms. Lambert's face. "I understand. Please, go on," he said, his neutral tone not concealing his intense focus. Ms. Lambert continued, her voice growing more animated, almost laced with indignation. "She derails every lesson, and this doesn't just affect me. It affects the other students too. I'm concerned that, without timely intervention, she'll bring the entire class down." As she spoke, Mr. King remained calm, listening carefully to every word. But his sharp eyes flashed with a look that thickened the air in the room. "When you refer to personal viewpoints, could you be more specific?" he asked, his tone soft but carrying an undeniable weight. Ms. Lambert, not noticing the shift in the atmosphere, immediately responded, "She focuses far too much on sensitive social issues like racism, injustice, and equal rights. I'm not saying these are unimportant topics, but the way she presents them is inappropriate for a professional academic setting. Sometimes, I feel like she's trying to draw attention to herself rather than focus on learning." Mr. King paused for a moment, his gaze sharpening further. Then he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I understand your concern, but I need to clarify something. Ms. Lambert, Did you know that Maya is my daughter? The air in the room seemed to freeze. The smug smile on Ms. Lambert's face instantly vanished, replaced by confusion and awkwardness. She blinked, seemingly unable to believe what she had just heard. I didn't know, she stammered, her face going pale. Mr. King, still composed, leaned slightly forward. Let me clarify then, he continued. Maya is not only my daughter, but she is also an outstanding student. I've been following her progress all along, and I'm very proud of how she challenges complex issues. A student having their own opinions and standing up for them is not disrespectful. It's a sign of independent thinking. I believe this is something we should encourage. Ms. Lambert, no longer confident, could only nod awkwardly. I understand, Mr. King. I'll reconsider how I've handled this. Mr. King stood, his gaze fixed directly on Ms. Lambert, carrying an undeniable authority. I hope you do, he said, his voice deep and resolute, for the fairness and development of all the students in your class. His eyes did not leave Ms. Lambert, his sharp and commanding gaze making the atmosphere in the room even heavier. He slowly took a breath, his voice warm yet unmistakably cold. Ms. Lambert, I think it's time to clear a few things up. Ms. Lambert, about to say something, froze when she met his gaze. He continued, each word stripping away the confidence from her face like a sharp knife. Maya's previous education, in fact, has been excellent, and I can personally guarantee that. Ms. Lambert furrowed her brow, confusion evident on her face. I don't understand. How can you be so sure? Mr. King straightened in his seat, his hands resting on the table, his voice cold yet carrying an unyielding strength. Because I am the one who directly oversees Maya's education. I am her father. That statement struck like a thunderclap in a calm sky, leaving Ms. Lambert instantly pale. The atmosphere in the room abruptly shifted. It was no longer Ms. Lambert's stage. The confusion, surprise, and a hint of panic were visible in her eyes as she stammered, I didn't know. Mr. King did not allow her to finish her sentence. His voice was firm and sharp, like the edge of a sword. And this, Ms. Lambert, makes me wonder if you truly understand your responsibilities. You say Maya challenges your points, but I see a student courageously questioning to uncover the truth. You claim she derails the lesson, but in reality, she is trying to help the class see the bigger picture. This is not the behavior of a weak student. It is the sign of a mind that knows how to think and a soul that yearns for justice. Ms. Lambert fell silent, her previous reproach now turning back against her. She struggled to keep her composure but couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. I don't mean to undermine Maya. It's just that I think she needs to adhere more strictly to the classroom rules. Rules? Mr. King interrupted, his voice not loud but carrying an overwhelming strength. Rules do not mean stifling creativity or silencing students' voices. Your job is to inspire them, not make them afraid to express their opinions. Ms. Lambert now had no words to rebut. Mr. King stood up, his gaze still fixed on her. Her face went pale as Mr. King's words sank in. Her lips trembled, trying to form words, but only silence stretched through the air. The arrogant confidence she had once held disappeared like a wisp of smoke before Mr. King's cold, stern gaze. You don't need to explain any further, Ms. Lambert. I think what you've said is clear enough. We will have a longer conversation about this, he continued, his tone sharp but not raised. But for now, I suggest you return to your class and continue the lesson. The students shouldn't be kept waiting. Ms. Lambert nodded mechanically, her eyes vacant as she turned to leave the room. But her steps faltered when Mr. King added, Oh, and Ms. Lambert, his voice even, but with an absolute authority, I will sit in your classroom until the end of today's lesson. I'm very interested in observing your teaching methods. That statement struck like a heavy blow, causing Ms. Lambert to tremble with every step she took. Mr. King entered the classroom shortly after, exuding a powerful presence that completely changed the atmosphere. The students, who had been chattering excitedly, immediately sat up straight, their eyes fixed on him. Students, Mr. King began, his voice deep and decisive. I believe we need to have a serious conversation about respecting diversity and the true purpose of education. The class fell into complete silence, Their eyes locked on Mr. King as they hung on every word he spoke. Ms. Lambert stood motionless by her desk, her face pale, her confidence completely gone. She glanced quickly toward Maya, but the fear or confusion in the girl's eyes was gone. Instead, Maya sat upright, her gaze glowing with pride and calmness like a light in the dark room. Mr. King scanned the classroom, his eyes reflecting a seriousness but also an understanding. "I have noticed several concerning issues in this classroom," he said, each word clear and deliberate. "Things that go against everything this school stands for." A heavy breath filled the room, as if everyone could feel the gravity of the moment. But one thing was certain: justice was being established, and the truth was coming to light. Then he stepped out of the room, leaving Ms. Lambert in a heavy silence. In the school hallway, the tension slowly dissipated as groups of students gathered, whispering about what they had just witnessed. But suddenly, something miraculous happened. Maya appeared, hand in hand with her father, walking down the hallway. At first, there was only a light round of applause. Then, like a wave, the clapping grew louder and eventually echoed through the entire hallway, filling the space with the energy of support and acknowledgement. Maya held her head high, her steps becoming stronger. The hesitation, fear, and sense of isolation she had endured for weeks seemed to vanish. Instead, she felt the strength and solidarity from her friends. For the first time, Maya not only felt seen but truly recognized for her courage and resilience. In the administration office, Ms. Lambert was facing a serious reality. An emergency meeting of the school board had been called immediately. They reviewed her actions based on testimonies from students, other teachers, and Mr. King himself. The final decision came quickly. Ms. Lambert was no longer suitable for her teaching role at the school. At the end of the school day, Ms. Lambert was escorted out of the school by security. She tightly clutched a box containing her personal belongings, walking in silence under the gaze of students peering through the windows. No one cheered. No one smiled. There was only a somber acknowledgement that her actions had led to serious consequences. The next morning, Maya walked into school with an entirely new feeling. No longer were there hesitant or cold stares. Instead, there were friendly smiles and waves from her friends. She overheard some positive conversations in the hallway. "Did you hear? The school is going to host a diversity workshop. And there's the Cultural Awareness Club too. I think we should join." When she entered her English class, now with a temporary substitute teacher, Maya was greeted with friendly looks and encouraging smiles from her classmates. The heavy atmosphere that had once hung over the class was now replaced by openness and mutual respect. At lunch, Maya was surprised to see her friends eagerly listening to her thoughts. They discussed how to make their school a more inclusive place. Ideas flowed. "We should add more literature from different cultures to the curriculum, and create a mentorship program for minority students too." For the first time, Maya felt like her voice truly mattered and was valued. After school, as Maya and her father walked out of the school, they passed by the parking spot where Ms. Lambert's car had once been. It was now empty. Mr. King stood nearby and gently placed his hand on Maya's shoulder. "You know, Maya," he said, his voice full of emotion, "what happened wasn't just about one teacher or one class. It was a reminder that change is possible. But it takes courage to speak up and stand firm when faced with injustice." Maya nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I just hope it will make a bigger difference. Too many other people face discrimination every day." The events at Evergreen High School not only exposed the underlying prejudices in the educational environment, but also proved that courage can lead to change. Maya's stand against injustice sparked a new movement within the school. New initiatives like diversity workshops and open dialogues between teachers and students began to challenge old biases. Both teachers and students were now forced to confront their own blind spots and hidden prejudices. From a student who endured injustice, Maya had risen to become a symbol of change. With courage and persistence, she not only overcame her pain but transformed it into strength to inspire others. She showed everyone that sometimes, all it takes is one person to stand up, and the whole community can change. Outside the classroom, Maya watched her father walk away, her eyes shining with pride and gratitude. She knew that today, justice had prevailed. Thank you so much for your continued support of the channel. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. During the content creation process, there may have been some small mistakes, and we hope you'll kindly overlook them. Wishing everyone happiness, peace, and good health in life. Stay tuned for more.